Any questions? Raise your hand.
Who decides what's immoral?
You asked one. You asked one.
I heard it was a good one.
So you said,
Raise your hand.
Okay.
There you go. Brexit has failed because our government has been dominated by people who have followed an internationalist ideology.
I quoted you. Did you say that the Enlightenment was negative for Europe? It was bad.
Turn it inside.
And that's the Enlightenment in France. Is that good or bad?
Okay, so let me answer this question. Omar. No, I don't want to kiss. I don't want to kiss. What the brother doesn't realise is that all of those crusaders in the Fourth Crusade were excommunicated by the Pope of their own age.
What's the origin of Christmas celebration?
Okay.
The origin of Christmas celebration.
Yeah. I agree. What I'd like to talk about is a kind of reflection, really, on 2018 in terms of some of the kind of bigger challenges that Western Europe has faced. Well, just Europe in general, or even the world, and how those challenges have been completely dropped by liberal society, by liberalism and its failures. Because really, as Christians, we keep associating ourselves with a liberal society that is failing itself and is drowning. And as we sort of peg our mast to their colours, as we peg our colours rather to their mast, as they drowned, we drown with them. And as Christians, I want to offer a Christian perspective on some of the challenges that we see current in society at large. And these are all the failures of liberalism, and we'll discuss that as we go forward. So the first of those failures is the migrant crisis. The migrant crisis is a failure of liberalism because Chancellor Angela Merkel, Trudeau in Canada, Obama and their ilk have sought to follow an internationalist ideology that sees the world as one giant economic market, and into which all of us as individuals are simply batteries to an economy. And that has resulted in that as the Western civilization has given up on the idea of family, given up on the idea of children, given up on its more traditional Christian, Judeo-Christian moral framework, we've stopped having the population necessary for economy. And as we know, our governments are very centered around the idea of economy. And so to replace that dwindling native population, our governments have sought instead to simply import populations from abroad, regardless of whether those populations have any connection to the Judeo-Christian roots of Europe. So Angela Merkel sends out this global invitation, initially to in theory to the refugees of Syria, but quite quickly that became an open door policy to anyone everywhere who is suffering. Now, this is an unsustainable policy. It will and has resulted in social conflict and social tension. And the way that our Western governments have tried to deal with the rising tensions and problems that this has caused is to simply clamp down upon the voices of protest that are speaking up quite legitimately about the consequences of just inviting everyone and his dog to come to Europe. It simply can't be done. Now, as a Christian, I'm going to upset everyone on every side. Because the fact of the matter is that as a Christian, my solidarity is with the church, not with the West. And many of those refugees and many of those migrants that are coming from Africa and coming from the Middle East and from the Far East are Christians. And so I would not turn my back on them, nor would I shut the door in their face. However, I also look at the example of Christ, the refugee who fled from Palestine to Egypt and was absorbed into Egyptian pagan society at a time when he was fleeing Herod. Now, that means that as a Christian, along with those injunctions in the Old Testament to do good and justice by those aliens amongst you, I can't and won't go in for any narrative that seeks to alienate or villainize refugees or migrants. Those who come here legitimately, those who come here legally, those who come here to build a home and to contribute to society should be welcomed and should be afforded every justice and every opportunity that we in the West also enjoy. However, that being said, when God in the Old Testament talks about doing justice to the alien amongst you, he doesn't in the next breath say abandon temple worship, give up Judaism, stop following the Ten Commandments, or to give up your identity. And this is where I and the Liberals part company. Because the Liberals say that the cost of absorbing the alien amongst us is that we need to make room for them in our culture by denying our culture, by denying our history, by denying our own identity. And so we have heretical, certainly almost apostate bishops in Sweden saying that we're going to remove crosses from our churches so that they don't offend Muslim migrants.
Cowards.
These are cowards. They are misguided Christians who are allowing liberal politics to guide their theology rather than allowing their theology to guide their politics. We should have an immigration policy in Europe that is based upon compassion. That compassion, its first duty are to those Christians like ourselves, those who could fit into our Judeo-Christian heritage most easily. Not simply an open door, but a door that is guarded and is selective about who you let into your house. Liberal multiculturalism has failed in the UK. And if you're watching this in any land apart from the UK, I would advise you strongly to urge your political class not to follow the failed experiment of the UK. It doesn't work here, it will not work where you live either. However, the church holds out a middle way between the xenophobic ethno-nationalists on one side, who want to define the English state based upon nothing but the colour of your skin, and the ridiculous open door policy of the Liberals on the other, which is working against our society in the sense that it cannot work. And it cannot work because, as we've seen, Angela Merkel, after inviting the whole world to Germany, realised that this policy can't work in Germany and is now demanding that the rest of the EU absorb the excess that Germany cannot absorb. As Christians, what we need to do is to offer an alternative. To offer an alternative that is based upon absorbing those populations that would fit into the Judeo-Christian heritage of the land. and this was being offered by numerous bishops, by numerous cardinals in the church, particularly a cardinal in Italy whose name I've forgotten, who offered a similar thing in Germany before I die. Liberalism is not working, and Christians who simply go along with a liberal form of Christianity, where they define their theology according to the paradigms of liberal politics, will not work for the church either. We are importing populations that are hostile to the church and that seek to persecute the church.
The church.
Instead,
the church.
we
Which
should
church?
encourage
Which church are you talking about?
we should
The
encourage
church.
Christian populations
Christian churches.
and support the migration of Christian populations, particularly those persecuted in the Muslim world, such as in Pakistan and the Middle East.
Right.
For those of you eager to ask questions,
And what did you
I will
Christians do?
give them
What did you
an
Christians do to
opportunity
other
to do
people?
so.
You persecuted people.
So-
you Christians have persecuted
unfortunately,
people for
that's not the
centuries.
topic that I'm talking
Persecuted
about.
people for centuries.
So,
Executed people for
Don't give
centuries.
him airtime,
Blind witches
JC. Don't
in
give him
rivers
airtime.
for centuries.
Come on,
You
So-
don't like the truth, do you? Persecutors ever.
the prison system
You're the
in
biggest
the
persecutors
United
ever.
Kingdom is collapsing, and it has been taken over
Gentle Jesus,
by
come
the
on, my
prisoners.
arse.
And it has been taken over by the prisoners because liberal society has washed their hands of prisoners. As Christians, we are commanded by Christ to remember those who are in prison, particularly
Well,
our
just remember
brothers
them,
and
that's not very
sisters
radical, is it?
who are in prison.
What remembering them
We
is not
can't
going
have
to
any
produce radical
truck
action, is it?
with
Remembering
those on the
prisoners.
extreme right who have the attitude that prisoners simply deserve everything that they get, and those liberal do-gooders on the other side who seem to think that the best way to run a prison system is to treat it like an expression of Butlins, a holiday camp. The prison system
You've
in
obviously
the
never been to
UK
prison.
has been taken over by drug pushers and Islamists. Islamists are recruiting and drug pushers are selling their drugs. And ironically, those two groups are often working together side by side.
Really?
So much for Islam.
You sound like Tommy Robinson.
So much for
You sound
the
like Tommy
Salafists.
Robinson. Not a Christian. You sound like Tommy
So-
Robinson.
What, as Christians, must we do when we see that our prison system has been taken over by the prisoners because it has been underfunded,
What's he going to do?
undermanned, and has been followed, has been governed by an ideology of liberalism that seems to think that the best way to run a prison system is to turn it
So what are you
into a
going to do about
holiday
the prisons?
camp.
Go on, get on with it.
So, the prison system
You're going to start
of this
executing
country
people.
needs
In the name of Jesus, you're going to start
discipline.
executing people.
It needs to have discipline imposed upon it.
Executions,
And
that's
the
what you
way
want.
to
Executions.
impose that
That's what
discipline
you Christians did. You
is to
executed
remove-
people.
is to remove is to remove
Are you
is
mad?
to
Are you
remove
mad, sir?
those
Have you not heard
laws, those human rights laws that prevent us from imposing discipline on those prisons, because it's those laws that are
Bring back
preventing
the
us
death penalty.
from
Bring back the
smashing
death
the
penalty.
drug
That's what you want.
gangs. It is those laws that are
That's what you
preventing
Christians
us
want. You want
from
some blood.
smashing the
Don't
Islamists
touch me,
who
my
are
friend. Go
using the
away.
prison systems
You know, you don't
as
like what
recruiting
I'm
gangs.
saying. Just suck it up.
Liberalism
Suck it
has
up.
failed. We need a
Sorry?
return to muscular Christianity. A Christianity that has a sense of itself and a sense of its own
You know what he just
discipline.
asked me?
Christian paedophile.
Did you hear? Says
We
they want
need
me
to
go back
smash
Africa.
the gangs that have
I'm
taken
not a
over our
racist. I'm not
prison,
a- we're discussing
because
religion
only
here, not
by
discussing anything
smashing
else.
those gangs,
Goodness.
by breaking
Some
them,
morons you meet down here.
by snapping their control of the prison system, Can we create an
it hasn't produced
environment
a single remedy
in which
for the-
prisoners have the best opportunity to reform, to become citizens that can contribute to their society? The current system is neither compassionate nor is it punishment, and it needs to be a combination of both.
Bring back the death penalty, yes?
Please notice that my atheist heckler has characterized my argument in a way that at no point have I sought to express.
Worse than the crime.
I want to talk about another failure of liberalism. The failure of Brexit.
Control yourself a little bit.
Brexit has failed because our government has been dominated by people who have followed an internationalist ideology for more than 60 years, and they cannot think of a world that does not have internationalist structures like the UN and like the EU. And so they have sought to undermine a popular vote in which the majority of the people of the United Kingdom voted democratically and peacefully in the largest democratic experiment of our time to leave the European Union. And yet the establishment and the sore losers, the Remoaners, have sought to undermine that democratic vote by demanding a people's vote. So I ask them, if you are asking for a people's vote now, what was the first referendum? If that was not a people's vote, when more than half the population of the UK voted, how can you now demand another vote? And if you demand another vote and get it, and you win, why can Brexiteers like myself not demand a third referendum?
It's not a principle.
You're not demanding a people's vote, you're demanding a loser's vote. Call it by its proper name. Brexit can only be stopped by a general election in which a elected party standing on a mandate to overturn the referendum wins that election. And that is the only democratic way that we can get ourselves out of this crisis that we have walked ourselves into, because David Cameron asked a binary question to a much more complicated issue. Nonetheless, the referendum was won democratically by Brexit, and it is incumbent upon every government, until they win an election on a mandate that says otherwise,
Is this in the Bible then?
to uphold that referendum.
Was Jesus a
But
Remainer?
as Christians, what should our view of Brexit be? Our view of Brexit should be the view that we have
what's the
of
Christian
every
view
government.
of Brexit? What's the Christian view of Brexit?
How
What
pro
would Jesus have done?
or anti
What would
the
Jesus have done,
church it is.
Jesus is a Palestinian.
The European Union has demonstrated over its existence that it is anti-Christian. It seeks to establish a European identity based upon a liberal civic identity,
Liberal is bad.
and not upon our Judeo-Christian heritage.
Based on freedoms. It's bad.
They had the opportunity
He wants
to
to take us back to when the
recognise
Christians ran
the
the planet.
Christian
They executed,
contribution
they
to
persecuted,
Europe
they crucified
in
people,
the
they
most
flayed people
recent
alive. And in this
European
part of London, they
constitution.
used to hang people.
and they refused to do so.
Because they were scientists.
They refused to do so. Don't give him airtime, JC.
Because they were sinners.
As Christians, we cannot give our support to an organisation of any government that seeks to oppose the church,
Which
the
church?
gospel,
Which
and
church?
the
There isn't
kingdom
a
of
single
God.
Christian church.
And so,
There isn't a single
we
Christian
must
church.
oppose the European Union.
Ironic.
Which church?
Another failure of liberalism that we need to discuss
Yeah, we need to
is
discuss
the
why you hate
environmental
liberals.
crisis
Your father must have been very strict
that
on
we
you.
see unfolding in front of us on a daily basis.
Did your father over chastise you at all?
The fact, ladies and gentlemen, that we are addicted to a culture of consumerism that is
Look
quite
at you.
literally
Where did he get all those clothes? Consumerism. Look at it.
destroying
We're all
our
consumers.
environment.
Mobile phone?
Is destroying our environment.
You're a hypocrite,
It's
sir.
something
You're a consumer
that
yourself.
needs to go front
You're a
and
consumer.
centre of our political concerns. The overuse of plastic is something that is quite literally going to work its way up
And the worst-
in the
the worst
food
thing is he's
chain,
wasting
and you
good
will
British
eat
oxygen.
the poison that we are putting into the environment.
And if
The
he's a
Christian
follower
faith
of the God of love, why is he so
in the book
angry?
of Genesis says that man was placed over creation to cultivate it, to be God's vice-regent over it, to use it, and to dominate it. We Christians,
You're not a
for the
Christian.
longest time,
You're a Christian
tapped
gangbanger.
into the idea of dominating the environment.
Now, hold
When
that
in the
camera steady, will you?
face of overwhelming scientific evidence, we need to tune in to that Christian narrative that says that we are also to cultivate and to care for the environment that God has placed us in charge of.
Really?
The Patriarch of Constantinople, for his entire patriarch,
Constantinople. It's
has
Constantinople.
spoke about the need to defend the
We
environment.
don't call it Constantinople anymore.
Pope
It's a Turkish
Francis has also spoke of this concern.
capital. What's the name of the Turkish?
As Christians, we need to challenge
Istanbul.
the
yeah.
capitalism, the consumerism, and its addiction to those ways of life built upon the idea of the individual consumer that is destroying our families and destroying the environment.
Okay, so consuming on a group level is okay then. It's just the
Destroying
individual.
on the group level is impossible. Notice, we're going to pause for the hecklers and for a changing of batteries. I'm going to round up, and then I'm going to give all my hecklers a chance to ask a question, see if they're man enough. So, we have the failure of liberalism. Notice, even when I'm not speaking about Islam, how the Muslim Dawah team behave. Notice how the Muslim Dawah team behave. This is their failure. The failure of their deen. Liberalism has failed Western society on the migrant crisis. Liberalism has failed our society with the prison crisis. Liberalism has failed with the Brexit crisis. Liberalism has failed on the environmental crisis. And yet, Western society, like dogs returning to their vomit, return to liberalism, thinking that the same horse will have a new trick for old problems, and it won't. We need to have a different worldview, because a different worldview will give us different answers. The Muslims and Islam are desperate to fill the vacuum that liberalism is creating. But we, as Europeans, do not need to look far to find a different and better answer.
Means Brexit.
We only need to look to our past, our Judeo-Christian heritage
Where is that church?
that once made us great nations and can make us great nations again.
EU means white
I
genocide.
don't call you to that weak form of Christianity you see on the BBC. I call you to that muscular faith of our forefathers, our ancestors. Now, ladies and gentlemen, for those that want to ask questions, now I'll take them.
I don't know if I misquoted you. Did you say that the Enlightenment was negative for Europe? It was bad.
Turn it inside.
And that's the Enlightenment in France.
Okay, so let me answer this question. Omar,
relax.
relax. Drink less coffee. Drink less coffee. So the question was, for those that couldn't hear
I
it.
love you.
No, I don't want to kiss. I don't want to kiss. I don't want to
Don't get a roommate.
I'm being sexually assaulted.
If you kiss him, I'm throwing you off that roof.
You know you're holding
A handshake is
Shut
as
up.
good as a
Calm
kiss.
down.
Merry Christmas.
Ask him question.
So let me answer this question. The question for those that couldn't hear it was, do I think the Enlightenment was bad? The Enlightenment was a mixed bag in European history. It necessarily tackled some of the superstitions and the archaic traditions of the church of its time and freed up much space in the terms of technological development. However, in placing scientific and rational knowledge at the forefront of our culture, it did so at the abandonment of morality.
Why you ask that question?
And the question that occupied Europe
Can you make it quick, man?
was not whether we should, but whether we could. And so Europe went on to, and has gone on to do, many technological advancements that are immoral, such as abortion, such as euthanasia.
Abortion started with the Renaissance.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Yes.
the Enlightenment needs a reflection by European society to take from it that which was good and to drop from it that which is harmful.
That's right.
And what has been harmful has been the abandonment of our Judeo-Christian heritage. The Christian church was never anti-science. Next question. Raise your hand, Raju.
Who decides what's immoral?
Are you asking a question?
No, I'm not.
Any questions? Raise your hand.
Who decides what's
No,
immoral?
you asked one. You asked one.
I think it was a good one.
So you said
Raise your hand.
Okay.
There you go.
You saying that you believe in Brexit, right?
Yes.
And then you said we European.
Yes.
When you say we European, do you include that brother with you?
My identity is in Christ, not in my...
Oh.
When you said we European,
Let me
it's not
address that
including you.
question.
It's not
Europe has
including
nothing to do with
It's
this.
not including
So he
you.
asked a question.
You're a Hindu. He's not including
He
you.
asked a question. Let me answer that question. He quotes me when I was talking
Jesus was a Palestinian.
about we Europeans. For those of you that were paying attention, I was making an appeal to Europeans to embrace their Judeo-Christian heritage.
What is that church? What is
The
that church?
assumption of that statement is that those Europeans are not Christians. So I am appealing to them to become Christians, because when you join the church, you join a global community,
Which one?
an international community,
International
a
church.
community that is made up of Europeans like me,
Here we go.
of Africans like my brother, and Indians, subcontinentals like my brother. I have an ethnicity. I'm not ashamed to profess it. But when we join the church, we join a confederation of ethnicities and nationalities who are united in being disciples of Christ. So being European and speaking to Europeans does not exclude those from the church who are disciples of Christ, because the church is bigger than Europe. The church existed in Africa for 2,000 years. The church existed in India for 2,000 years. The church existed in the Middle East for 2,000 years. The church existed in Europe for 2,000 years. These things are not the same. Notice the manners of the Dawati. Notice the manners of the Dawati. So, this is gang.
He's got a question.
What's the question?
I have a question.
It was a question.
Speaking about Christian morality, during the Crusades, the Byzantine Empire. Yeah, no, I'm going to talk about the Crusades.
Byzantine.
The Byzantine. They went down to the Middle East to fight the Turks, right? They got bored of fighting Muslims, saying, we don't want to fight no Muslims anymore. There's no money in it, right? Then they sacked Constantinople. Where was the Christian morality you speak so highly of?
So,
They did the first crusade.
let's
400
deal
years after the
with
fall
the
of
Crusades, and particularly the abject and complete failure of the Fourth Crusade, which every Christian, even Christians at the time, condemned as a betrayal. What the brother doesn't realize is that all of those crusaders in the Fourth Crusade were excommunicated by the Pope of their own age. They had betrayed their vows and they were excommunicated. However, the fall of Constantinople is mourned by Christians as a failure, as a betrayal of Christian love. Pope John Paul II, when he visited Constantinople and the Church of Hagia Sophia, knelt in the Church of Hagia Sophia as a sign of mourning at the cost that the Fourth Crusade had befallen upon our brothers and sisters in the East. Constantinople will, God willing, be in the hands of the Christians again. And Hagia Sophia will once again resonate to the sound of the divine liturgy.
Constantinople, I think you mean
Next
Byzantium.
question.
Your hand around
And then we get Native Americans and the Aborigines. We're going to take Australia and North America
You
again.
know that most of the artworks made during the Renaissance were religion-based. About Christianity.
Don't ask me different.
Okay, so the question was, for those that couldn't hear it, do I know that most of the artwork, that was based in the Renaissance was religious art? I have no statistics to say what quantity of art was produced in the Renaissance that was religious. However, What I do know is that some of the greatest masterpieces of European heritage, my heritage as a European, was produced by the church and is open for all people to enjoy. This is our contribution to civilization, and it is something that we as Christians should be rightly proud of. Next question.
You're Indian. Why the church are closing?
Where's the question?
Why the church are closed?
And the church are selling the church.
Any questions?
Christians are selling your own church. You want to open Istanbul and you're selling the church.
What's the origin of Christmas celebration?
I'm really sorry, I can't hear you.
What's the origin of Christmas celebration?
Okay.
The origin of Christmas celebration.
Yeah. So the origin of the Christian celebration. It's a really good question, very timely. Since, just in case you don't know, it's still Christmas. Lots of people seem to think that Christmas happens on the 25th of December and that's it. It actually goes on. Depending on which discipline, it goes on either for 12 days or goes right on until the early part of February. Bet most of you didn't know that. That's a free fact. Now you can show off at your next New Year's party. So, as to the origin, the short story for this brother is that it is a Christianization of a Roman pagan festival called the Invincible Sun that happened on the 25th of December. And as the Roman Empire became Christians, the Christians simply decided to celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ on that day. Why? Because the theme of Christmas resonated well with that culture. Jesus Christ is the Father's unconquerable Son who conquers death and conquers the darkness of sin. And as the Son conquered the light and signified the end of winter, so the birth of Christ signifies the end of sin's reign over us. Our freedom in Christ from sin and from the tyranny of the devil and the world. As Christians, we are not ashamed of this. As Christians, we admit it openly. It is no critique of our faith to point out that which we freely admit. Christians celebrate Christ's crucifixion and resurrection, and from that we developed the tradition to celebrate other Christian parts of Christ's life. And it made sense when converting the calendar of pagans that we took their religious dates that were already public holidays and used them for ourselves.
So it means you celebrate pagan religion then?
No, my friend. It means we celebrate Christ's birth. Pay attention. Next question.
Excuse me, one remark.
Death and rising, right? Easter.
Yes.
Easter.
Christos Anestire.
Christianity.
Okay. So, is that a question?
Yes.
Right, what's the question?
The question is, what do you know about Easter?
Okay.
Easter bunny maybe.
So, the next question is about the word Easter. I can't claim to be an expert on the history of words.
I can tell you.
However, I know that when Christians converted my own ancestors, the Saxons, the Scandinavians,
There you go.
they took the language of those peoples,
They took their pagan
such as Easter, and they used it as the name for their own festivals. But let's be clear, the festival of Easter is not the same as the festival of the pagan god. Why do we know this? And this is where I'm going to show that Rajiv doesn't know as much as he thinks he does. Because
Bob the liar knows
the dating of Easter was decided at the Council of Constantinople in 325.
The celebration
And he was connected to the Jewish Passover moon.
I thought the Jewish killed
And
Jesus.
so,
No, it wasn't.
that date of Easter is dictated by something that predates the conversion of both the Anglo-Saxons and the Scandinavians,
What's more
and
important?
therefore the adoption of the word Easter.
The appropriation is
Rajiv needs to do more than watch a YouTube video and read a Dawah book.
So here's the thing.
Next
here's
question.
The thing. You've just
No,
allowed him.
don't
you've
give
just
him
allowed
that
him to
time,
preach.
It's not a debate.
Next question.
You've just allowed him to preach.
Oh, are we all
Allowed him to
finished?
preach. He's not
Are we
actually
all
answering
finished?
questions. He's
Any
not
more
answering
questions?
So you don't know. So you don't know about
Any
Easter.
questions?
You don't know
Okay,
about Easter.
so ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to go get a drink
No, he's not really.
and then I'll be back to talk about something else.
Thank you, Bob.
Merry Christmas, God bless, and if you're celebrating on the 1st of January, Happy New Year.
Christian's best activity, running as usual.
Rajiv, you'll have your chance to debate me.
What's more important?
You'll have your chance once I've had a drink. You'll have your done. You'll have your chance.
Context or date?
God bless you. Merry Christmas, Bob. Merry Christmas.